The desert wind moved slowly over the long line of men and animals. It was the year 1324, and somewhere between the cities of North Africa and the Holy Land of Mecca, a caravan stretched beyond the horizon. Camels carried sacks that glowed under the sun. Gold. So much gold that it bent the backs of those who guarded it. In the distance, a city waited. Cairo, a center of trade and power. Its markets were busy. Its rulers were confident. They had seen wealth before. But they had never seen this. When the caravan entered the city, people stopped. Traders forgot their goods. Even the officials watched in silence. A king from the land south of the Sahara had arrived, and with him, a fortune so vast that it would shake the value of gold itself. Within days, prices would fall. Markets would distort. And a question would begin to echo across the Islamic world. How could one man carry so much wealth, and what would it cost? The popular image of Mansa Musa is simple. He is often described as the richest man who ever lived, a ruler so wealthy that his gold broke entire economies. There is truth in this image. But it is incomplete. Because his wealth did not appear from nowhere. It came from a powerful empire built on trade, labor, and control. And his famous journey was not just a display of riches, it was a calculated act of political and religious meaning. In this story, three things emerge that few expect. First, how his wealth was tied to a global system that connected Africa to the wider world. Second, how his actions in Cairo had long-lasting economic effects that lasted for years. And third, the hidden cost of his rule, a cost paid by people history rarely names. So the real question is not just how rich he was. It is this: did Mansa Musa shape the world through vision, or through excess that even he could not control? Long before Mansa Musa took power, West Africa was already a place of quiet strength. The Mali Empire rose in a land that many outsiders misunderstood. To some, it was simply desert and distance. But in truth, it was a crossroads, a meeting place of trade routes that linked gold, salt, and knowledge. Gold came from the south, from deep within forested lands. Salt came from the north, from the harsh Sahara. Together, they created wealth. And whoever controlled this exchange held power. At the top of this system stood the Mansa, the emperor. His authority was not just political. It was economic and spiritual. He controlled trade routes. He taxed goods. And he protected the flow of wealth that passed through his lands. Ordinary life in Mali was shaped by this system. Traders crossed dangerous deserts. Farmers worked land that depended on seasonal rains. And far from the centers of power, enslaved people labored in conditions that supported the empire's wealth. This was not a simple golden age. It was a complex world of opportunity and hardship, where wealth at the top depended on labor at the bottom. By the early 14th century, Mali had become one of the strongest empires in Africa. Its influence reached across regions. Its cities, like Timbuktu, began to grow as centers of learning and trade. And then came Musa. He was not born into the throne in the usual way. According to tradition, his predecessor left on a sea expedition and never returned. Musa, once a deputy, stepped into power, not by conquest, but by absence. And in that moment, history shifted. Because this was not just a king inheriting an empire. This was a man who would redefine what power looked like on a global stage. Mansa Musa's rise began with control. He secured the trade routes. He strengthened his authority. And he understood something many rulers did not: wealth alone was not enough. It had to be seen. His first test came in governance. Could he hold together a vast empire of different peoples and regions? He moved carefully. He placed loyal officials in key positions. He ensured that gold continued to flow. Stability became his foundation. But stability created ambition. And ambition needed a stage. That stage came in the form of a pilgrimage, the Hajj, the sacred journey to Mecca required of all Muslims who could afford it. For Musa, this was not just a religious duty. It was an opportunity. He would not travel quietly. He would travel in a way the world could not ignore. The obstacle was not distance alone. The journey across the Sahara was dangerous. Heat, thirst, and uncertainty could destroy even the strongest caravan. But Musa prepared on a scale never seen before. He gathered thousands of attendants. Soldiers. Servants. Officials. Camels carried not just supplies, but gold, bars, dust, and ornaments. One observer later described it simply: never had there been such a display. But why risk so much? Because Musa understood reputation. In a world connected by trade and faith, news traveled. Stories shaped power. And if he could present Mali as a center of wealth and devotion, he could place his empire firmly on the map of the Islamic world. As the caravan moved north, its legend grew before it arrived. Then came Cairo. And everything changed. When Musa entered the city, he did not act like a cautious guest. He gave freely. He handed out gold to the poor. He offered gifts to officials. He spent without hesitation. At first, this generosity seemed noble. But gold is not just a symbol. It is a system. And when too much gold enters a market, its value falls. Slowly, then rapidly, the price of gold in Cairo began to drop. Traders adjusted. Prices shifted. The economy reacted. What had seemed like kindness became disruption. Years later, accounts would suggest that the effects lasted more than a decade. The value of gold did not recover quickly. Musa's presence had left a mark that could not be undone. So was this power, or a lack of control? One chronicler noted that Musa later tried to correct the damage by borrowing gold back at high interest. It was an attempt to stabilize what he had shaken. But the lesson remained. Even immense wealth had limits. At the peak of his journey, Musa reached Mecca. He completed the pilgrimage. He stood among thousands of others, not as a distant king, but as a believer. This was his greatest moment. He had connected his empire to the spiritual center of his faith. He had announced Mali's presence to the wider world. And he had done so in a way no one could ignore. But the cost followed him. The wealth he distributed could not be recovered fully. The display that elevated his status also exposed his resources. And within his empire, the system that produced that wealth remained unchanged. Enslaved labor continued. Trade continued. The foundation held, but it was not without strain. And then, a quieter shift began. On his return, Musa did something less dramatic, but perhaps more lasting. He brought scholars, architects, and teachers back with him. He invested in cities like Timbuktu. He supported the building of mosques and schools. Knowledge became part of his legacy. Yet even here, questions remained. Was this a vision for the future, or another way to display power? In time, Musa's story moved toward its end. The details are less dramatic than his rise, less visible than his journey. He ruled for years after the pilgrimage, maintaining the structure he had built. But like all empires, Mali would not last forever. After his death, the strength of the empire slowly weakened. Successors struggled to maintain the same level of control. Trade routes shifted. Rivals rose. The system that had supported such immense wealth began to fracture. Looking back, it is tempting to see this as inevitable. Was the fall already written in the way the empire was built? The concentration of wealth, the dependence on trade, the pressures of expansion, all of these carried risks. Musa had mastered them for a time. But no system remained stable forever. And so, the man who once carried gold across continents became part of a larger pattern: rise, peak, and decline. The story closed not with a single dramatic moment, but with a gradual fading of power. Yet the question remains. Did his greatness lie in what he built, or in what he revealed about the limits of wealth? The legacy of Mansa Musa is vast and complex. Without him, the Mali Empire might have remained unknown to much of the outside world. His journey placed West Africa into global awareness. It connected regions that had long been linked by trade, but not always by recognition. Cities like Timbuktu became symbols of learning. Scholars gathered. Books were written. Knowledge spread across regions. This was not an accident. It was the result of deliberate choices, to invest, to connect, to expand beyond simple wealth. And yet, history has often reduced him to a single idea: the richest man who ever lived. This is the myth. Because wealth alone does not explain his impact. It was how he used it, and how it moved through systems larger than himself, that shaped history. Where was he judged fairly? In recognizing his role in expanding knowledge and connection. Where was he misunderstood? In imagining that his wealth was infinite, effortless, or without consequence. The truth is more human. He was a ruler navigating power, faith, ambition, and limitation. He achieved what few could. And he revealed what even the greatest could not control. That is why his story still matters. Because it shows not just the height of human achievement, but its boundaries. And so the final question remains open. Was Mansa Musa a visionary who elevated his empire to global importance, or a ruler whose excess exposed the fragile nature of wealth itself? History does not answer this easily. But it leaves behind the evidence, and the silence between it. For those who look closely, the story is still unfolding. And if this journey into the past revealed something new, something unexpected, then the next story may reveal even more.